My place card said table 11. I know because I checked it 3 times, thinking I had misread it. I hadn't. Table 11 was in the corner of the ballroom, behind a decorative pillar wrapped in white ribbon, so far from the head table that I could barely make out my brother's face when he laughed. And somehow, even that wasn't the worst part of the night. Let me back up. My name is Rachel Calloway. I'm a structural engineer. I've spent the last 8 years designing bridges, actual bridges, the kind that carry 40,000 cars a day over rivers and gorges and interstate highways. I've worked on projects in 6 states. I have my PE license, a commendation from the Federal Highway Administration, and a letter of recognition from the governor of Ohio sitting in a folder somewhere in my apartment. I'm telling you this not to brag. I'm telling you this because by the time that night was over, my own father would have to pretend he already knew. My brother Daniel was getting married. The venue was a hotel ballroom in Charleston, South Carolina, the kind of place with chandeliers that look like frozen waterfalls and staff who call you ma'am before you've said a word. Daniel had picked it because his fiancée, Brooke, had grown up in Charleston and her family had connections everywhere. The Whitfields were old Southern money, gracious, warm in that practiced way, and absolutely certain that every room they walked into had been waiting for them. Daniel had been with Brooke for 4 years. She was kind enough to me. We weren't close, but we weren't unfriendly. What I didn't understand, until that weekend, was how completely my family had reorganized itself around her world. I drove down from Charlotte on Friday afternoon. I'd taken 2 days off work, which wasn't easy. We were in the middle of a load analysis for a cable-stayed bridge outside Pittsburgh, and my absence meant someone else would have to cover my calculations. I didn't complain. It was my brother's wedding. I bought a dress I couldn't really afford, got my hair done that morning at a salon near the hotel, and showed up at the rehearsal dinner with a smile and a card that had a check inside for more than I should have spent. My parents were already there when I arrived. My father was talking with Brooke's father, a man named Harold Whitfield, who had the handshake of someone who'd been practicing it for 60 years. My mother was laughing with Brooke's aunts. I stood at the edge of the room for a few minutes, waiting for someone to notice me. My father glanced over, gave me a small wave, and turned back to Harold. My mother said, "Rachel, sweetheart, find a seat." I found a seat. I ate my salmon. I watched Daniel make the rounds, watched my parents beam every time Harold Whitfield said something complimentary about the Calloway family. At one point, Harold turned to my father and asked warmly, "And Rachel, what is it she does?" There was a half-second pause. Not long. Most people wouldn't have caught it. "She's in engineering," my father said. Then he moved on to asking Harold about his golf game. Not structural engineering. Not bridges. Not the project I'd spent 3 years completing that now carried commuter traffic over the Kanawha River every single day. Just she's in engineering, the way you'd say she's in sales, or she's in between things right now. I drove back to the hotel that night and told myself it didn't matter. It had always been like this. Daniel was the one who stayed close to home, who called every Sunday, who showed up for holidays without being asked. He was the easy one. I was the one who moved away for graduate school and then again for work, who missed Thanksgiving 2 years running because of project deadlines, who existed in my family's life mostly as a voice on the phone and an occasional visitor who needed the guest room made up. I had made my choices. I knew that. What I hadn't understood, not fully, was how completely those choices had reclassified me. Not just as the daughter who lived far away, as the daughter who wasn't really part of the story anymore. The wedding was Saturday evening. I arrived early because I'm always early. It's an occupational habit. The same instinct that makes me check load tolerances twice. The ceremony was in the hotel's garden. Then everyone moved to the ballroom for the reception. A woman at a small table near the entrance handed me a card with my name and table number, table 11. I smiled, thanked her, and went to find my seat. The pillar was white marble, about 3 feet wide, wrapped in ribbon and a spray of eucalyptus that smelled lovely and accomplished nothing except blocking my view of the room. I was seated between a cousin of Brooke's I had never met named Garrett, who spent most of the evening on his phone, and an older woman named Patricia, who told me she was a former colleague of Harold's from his banking days. Patricia was perfectly pleasant, but she was not my family. I looked toward the head table. Daniel and Brooke were glowing, the way people glow on the best day of their lives. My parents were at the family table, 12 feet away, and in full view of the room. My father was already laughing at something Harold said. My mother was straightening Daniel's boutonniere even though it didn't need straightening. She just wanted to touch him. I understood that. What I didn't understand was how neither of them had noticed where I was sitting. Or maybe they had noticed and said nothing. And that was the thing I couldn't quite make myself finish thinking. The cocktail hour passed. The toasts began. Daniel's best man told a story about a camping trip that made everyone laugh. Brooke's maid of honor cried through the entire thing and made everyone else cry too. My father stood up and talked about Daniel for 4 minutes, his work ethic, his kindness, how proud the family was. He mentioned Brooke's name 6 times. He mentioned Daniel's name 11 times. He did not mention my name once, which made sense because I wasn't part of the toast. But I want you to understand that I was counting because I had nothing else to do behind that pillar. Dinner was served. The table conversation moved the way it does at weddings, circling between how people know the couple, what they do, where they live. Garrett put his phone away long enough to ask what I did. I said I was a structural engineer. He nodded the way people nod when they've already stopped listening, then asked Patricia if she'd tried the crab cake. I cut my chicken into smaller pieces than it needed to be cut into. Halfway through dinner, I became aware that someone was standing at the edge of the dance floor looking around the room the way people do when they're trying to find someone. He was a tall man, maybe mid-60s, with silver hair and the kind of posture that doesn't come from yoga, it comes from decades of someone telling you to hold yourself like you mean it. He was wearing a dark suit and a tie with a small American flag pin on the lapel. He had a quiet authority about him. Not loud, not showy. The kind that fills a room without asking permission. His eyes moved across the tables, and then they stopped. He was looking at me. I set down my fork. He walked over, unhurried, and I saw something in his expression shift from searching to certain. He stopped at the edge of table 11 and looked at me for a moment, and then he smiled the way you smile when you see something that surprises you in the best possible way. "Excuse me," he said. "Are you Rachel Calloway? Daniel's sister?" "I am," I said. He extended his hand. "Warren Mitchell. I know your work." I shook his hand. "I'm sorry, my work?" "The Kanawha River Bridge," he said. "The load distribution model you developed. We've been using it as a reference case in 3 projects since it published. I had no idea you were Daniel's sister until Harold mentioned it to me this afternoon." I stared at him for a moment. I didn't know Harold knew what I did. "He looked you up," Warren said simply. "He's thorough that way." He glanced at the pillar, then back at me, and something in his expression was careful and kind at the same time. "Would you mind if I stole a few minutes of your time? There's someone I'd like you to meet." I thought about table 11. I thought about Garrett's phone and Patricia's crab cake and my father's 4-minute toast. I stood up and said, "I wouldn't mind at all." Warren Mitchell, I would learn in the next 10 minutes, was the Director of Infrastructure Development for the Southeast Regional Transportation Authority. He oversaw bridge and highway projects across 5 states. He had been invited to the wedding because he and Harold Whitfield had served on a civic board together for 15 years, and their families had been close since before Daniel was born. He was, in short, one of the most consequential people in my professional field in the southeastern United States. He had been seated at table 4, near the front, but had spent most of dinner walking between tables because he knew half the room. He introduced me to a woman named Dr. Sandra Okafor, who headed the engineering department at the University of South Carolina and was working with the state DOT on a long-term infrastructure plan. He introduced me to a man named Phil Garrett, not Brooke's cousin Garrett, a different one who was a senior project manager at one of the largest civil engineering firms in the country and had been trying to staff a bridge rehabilitation project in Georgia for 6 months. I stood in the middle of that ballroom and had conversations I had been waiting years to have. Warren talked about my Kanawha model, the way my own father had never talked about anything I'd done. He used the word elegant. He said the load transfer analysis had solved a problem 3 other teams had been circling for 2 years. Dr. Okafor asked if I'd ever considered teaching. Phil pulled out a business card and said, "Seriously, call me Monday." At some point during all of this, I became aware that people at the family table were watching. I didn't turn around to look. I didn't need to. I could feel it the way you can feel a change in air pressure before a storm, a shift in the atmosphere, a new weight in the room. I kept my attention on Warren and Sandra and Phil and the conversation I was finally having. Warren touched my arm briefly and said, "I'd like to say something before the dancing starts, if you don't mind." "Say something?" I asked. "To the room," he said. "I hope that's all right." I want people to know who you are. I could have said no. Looking back, I almost did some old reflex in me, the one trained by years of making myself small so no one would notice how much space I wasn't being given. But I looked at him, and I thought about table 11, and I said, "That's more than all right." He walked to where the band was set up, and someone handed him a microphone with the ease of a man who is often handed microphones. The room quieted down. My parents looked up from the family table. My father had his hand resting on his water glass. My mother's smile was polite and waiting. Warren thanked the couple, said something warm about Harold and the Whitfield family, and then he paused. "I want to take a moment," he said, "to acknowledge someone in this room that I suspect many of you don't know nearly well enough." He looked across the ballroom, directly at me, and I felt every eye in the room follow his. Rachel Calloway, Daniel's sister, is one of the most gifted structural engineers working in this country today. Her load distribution model for the Kanawha River Bridge has become a reference standard in our field. 3 projects I oversee directly have benefited from her work. 20,000 people drive over infrastructure that is safer because of calculations she ran. He paused. "Daniel, I think your family owes you a longer toast than you got earlier." The room laughed. Daniel laughed. Harold Whitfield started the applause. I was standing near the edge of the dance floor, and I didn't look away. I held my champagne glass and I smiled the smile of someone who has been waiting a long time for the room to turn in the right direction. Then I looked at my father. He had stopped smiling, not in an angry way, not in a wounded way, in the way of a man who has just been shown something he wasn't expecting to have to see a calculation he'd been getting wrong for years, suddenly corrected in front of everyone. He looked at me, and for the first time that evening, he actually looked at me, not through me, not past me, at me. My mother's eyes were bright in a way that meant she was trying not to cry. I didn't know yet whether those were good tears or complicated ones. Maybe both. Some things you don't sort out in the middle of a ballroom. Daniel found me 20 minutes later. He had his jacket off and his tie loosened and the look of a man who has just had the best and most disorienting day of his life. He hugged me the way he used to hug me when we were kids too hard, without asking. "Why didn't I know about the bridge?" he said into my shoulder. "You never asked," I said. But I said it without the sharpness I might have used an hour earlier. Something had shifted. Not everything. Not the years of dinners where my work was a footnote and his was the headline. Not the holiday tables where someone would say, "So what's new with you?" and then answer their own phone before I finished. Not all of that, but something. He pulled back and looked at me. "I'm asking now." So I told him. I told him about the 3 years on the Kanawha project. The nights I spent reworking the load distribution after the site survey came back wrong. The week we found the foundation variance, and I had to rebuild the entire analysis from scratch. I told him about standing on the bridge the morning it opened and watching the first cars go over and feeling the road hold exactly the way I'd designed it to hold. I told him it was the best moment of my professional life, and I had celebrated it alone in my apartment with takeout Thai food and a glass of wine, because no one in the family had remembered the date. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That's not okay, Rach." "No," I agreed. It wasn't. My father found me near the end of the night. The band was playing something slow and most of the older couples were on the dance floor. He came and stood next to me, and for a while we both just watched them. He had his hands in his pockets, and his jacket was wrinkled in the way it gets when he's been shaking hands all night. "Warren Mitchell told me he's been hoping to meet you for 2 years, my father said. "I know," I said. "He told me the same thing." Another pause. My father has never been a man who apologizes with words when he can do it with silence. It's a limitation I've accepted, but this silence was different from the ones I'd grown up with. It had a texture to it, something unsettled, like he was holding a weight he'd just realized had been in his hands the whole time. "Your mother cried," he said finally. "I saw. She's proud of you." He cleared his throat. "We both are. I know we don't always." He stopped. Started again. "I know I don't always show that the way I should." It was not a full apology. It was not everything I'd wanted to hear at the 100 dinners and holidays where I had felt like a visitor in my own family. But it was something. It was my father standing next to me at the end of his son's wedding and choosing to be there, in that spot, next to me, when he could have been anywhere else in the room. "I know, Dad," I said. He nodded. We watched the dancers. After a while he said, "Tell me about the bridge." And I did. I told him about the cable-stayed design, the challenges of the riverbed geology, the way the load transfers across the towers in weather events. I told him things he would only half understand and watched him try to follow them anyway, nodding more than he needed to, asking questions that weren't quite the right questions but were questions nonetheless. It was the most he'd ever asked me about my work. It was not enough to close 8 years of distance, but it was a start. And I have learned in engineering and in everything else that structures are built one load-bearing connection at a time. Phil Garrett's card is on my desk in Charlotte. I called him that Monday. The Georgia project is a 17-month rehabilitation of a 1960s-era highway bridge outside Savannah, and they want me to lead the structural assessment. It's the biggest project I've been offered in my career. Warren Mitchell sent me an email the following week with 3 names he thought I should meet. Dr. Okafor has invited me to speak to her graduate program in the fall. Daniel texted me a photo the Tuesday after the wedding. It was a screenshot from the local Charleston paper, a small social item about the reception, with a mention of Warren's remarks. He'd circled my name with a red emoji arrow and written below it, "My sister, the bridge builder." Literally. I'm still in the corner of the frame in that photo. You can just barely see the edge of my shoulder behind a pillar wrapped in white ribbon. But if you look closely enough, you'll notice I'm the one standing.